She disappeared without a trace. And 12 years later, a hidden cabin in the forest finally gave up its secret. In a quiet Georgia suburb, a 9-year-old girl named Molly rode her pink bike one summer evening and never came home. For over a decade, her mother searched, hoping, breaking, and rebuilding herself again and again. Then, during a routine cabin renovation hundreds of miles away, workers discovered something buried that would reignite the cold case and unravel a truth no one was prepared to face. What really happened to Molly during those missing years? Who was the man seen traveling with her? And how did a daughter survive when the whole world believed she was gone? Watch until the very end to uncover the shocking twists, the emotional reunion, and the long road back from silence. Leave a comment if the story moved you, hit the like button to support true storytelling, and subscribe for more powerful real-life mysteries. The screen door creaked as it swung shut behind her. Molly Patterson, 9 years old and full of energy that refused to be contained by four walls, jumped down the front steps 2 at a time with her helmet tucked under her arm. Her pink bike, slightly scuffed on one side from a tumble last week, leaned against the porch like an old friend waiting to play. The late afternoon sun spilled golden light across the sleepy suburban street in Marietta, Georgia. It was that perfect kind of southern spring. Warm, but not yet suffocating, with the scent of cut grass in the air and the distant hum of lawnmowers on neighboring lawns. Wind chimes jingled faintly from the house across the street. It was an ordinary day, utterly forgettable, until it wasn't. Her mother, Rachel, stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her voice cutting through the quiet like the warning bell before a train passes. "Malls," she called. "Be home by 6. Dinner's meatloaf and corn. Your favorite." "I know, Mom," Molly chirped, strapping on her helmet. "I'll just ride to the playground and back." "Stay off the main road," Rachel added automatically, the way mothers do, half worried, half distracted by the boiling pot she'd left on the stove. "Promise." Molly's reply was already floating over her shoulder as she pedaled down the driveway, her knees pumping, tassels on her handlebars catching the sun. Rachel watched her daughter for a moment longer, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Molly was growing fast, too fast, but still young enough to wave without being asked. She turned back inside, never imagining it would be the last time she saw that bike rolling down the sidewalk. The last time she'd hear her daughter's voice. The neighborhood was quiet, like it always was. Safe. Familiar. Molly passed old Mrs. Tinsley trimming her rose bushes, waved at Tyler and Nico playing catch in the empty lot near the mailboxes, then turned the corner by Maple Street, heading toward the playground 2 blocks down. She never made it there. Somewhere between the slow stretch of sidewalk that ran behind the church and the path lined with crepe myrtles, the world forgot Molly Patterson. By 6:07, Rachel was stirring the gravy, glancing at the clock. By 6:20, she was on the porch, scanning the street with growing unease, arms crossed tight against her chest, telling herself maybe she lost track of time. By 6:35, she was knocking on neighbors' doors, her voice already trembling. By 7:00, she was dialing 911, her hands shaking so violently she dropped the phone twice. And by nightfall, flashlights and search dogs were combing through every shadowed corner of the subdivision. But the only thing they found was a pink ribbon caught in the chain-link fence near the woods. No signs of struggle, no witnesses, no goodbye. Just a little girl, a pink bike, and a silence that swallowed them whole. And in the quiet that followed, a community would unravel. One secret, one suspicion at a time. At first, it was just a late dinner. Rachel Patterson stirred the corn on the stove, glancing again at the microwave clock. 6:18 p.m. Nearly 20 minutes passed when Molly promised she'd be back. She turned down the burner, a flicker of irritation passing through her. Molly was usually responsible. Independent, yes, but never careless. Not like this. By 6:25, Rachel stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. The neighborhood was still, steeped in the soft glow of early evening. The cicadas had started their nightly drone, and wind rustled through the dogwoods. There was no sign of her daughter. She called out, "Molly!" Nothing. She walked down to the curb, peered left, then right, toward the little curve that led to Maple Street. No bike, no movement, just the soft buzz of porch lights flickering to life and the distant sound of someone grilling. She tried calling Molly's name again, louder this time, the note of worry more obvious. Still nothing. A breath caught in Rachel's throat. She turned and rushed inside, picked up the phone, and began calling the neighbors, the Kellers, the Parkers, the Nguyens. Each call was a stab of growing dread. "Have you seen Molly?" No, not since earlier. She was riding her bike, right? She waved when she passed, but that was around 5. Rachel's voice began to crack by the 4th call. She grabbed her keys, nearly dropping them, and raced to the car. She drove slowly down the blocks Molly would have traveled, past the school bus stop, the community mailbox, the corner where the sidewalk curves behind the Methodist church. Still nothing. No pink bike, no flash out of a helmet, no squeal of little girl laughter. Her hands were shaking when she called 911. My daughter went out to ride her bike and she hasn't come home. She's only 9. The dispatcher's voice was calm. Too calm. When was the last time you saw her? About an hour ago, maybe more. I've called neighbors. She's not at the playground. She's not anywhere. Ma'am, what's your address? We're sending officers now. Within minutes, red and blue lights cut across the quiet neighborhood. Patrol cars rolled up with officers stepping out, notepads already open. One spoke with Rachel as she trembled on the porch, clinging to a photo of Molly in her 3rd-grade class picture. Blonde hair and pigtails, front tooth missing, eyes full of mischief. Other officers canvassed the street, knocking on doors, asking the same questions over and over. No one had seen her since around 5. Then came the floodlights, the K-9 unit, the volunteers. Flashlights swept across backyards, under porches, into sheds. The woods behind the playground were scoured, voices calling Molly's name again and again until they grew hoarse. Rachel's ex-husband, Derek, showed up an hour later, breathless and pale. "I should have been here," he said, his voice cracking. "Where the hell is she?" No one had answers. Just after 10 p.m., an officer called for a light over near the fence line behind the church. The searchers gathered, hearts sinking in collective silence. There, caught in the thick brush and dirt, was a single pink sneaker, scuffed, damp from dew, the sole worn just slightly on one side. It lay twisted, unnatural, like it had been dropped in haste or torn off in motion. Rachel recognized it instantly. "That's hers," she whispered, falling to her knees. "Oh my God, that's Molly's." The officer knelt beside her, gently pulling her away, trying to calm her. But there was no calm now. Not in Rachel, not in Derek, not in the crowd that had gathered, now holding their breath in awful realization. Because kids don't just vanish. Not here. Not in Marietta. Not from quiet cul-de-sacs and tree-lined streets. But tonight, something had broken the rules. And in its place came panic. Thick, suffocating, and just beginning. The first 48 hours felt like a lifetime. Flyers went up overnight, plastered to telephone poles, grocery store windows, the bulletin board at the church. Molly's school photo, her wide grin, the pastel-striped shirt she'd insisted on wearing on picture day, became a ghostly fixture across town. Strangers stared from behind steering wheels and shopping carts, murmuring prayers under their breath. Volunteers fanned out again and again, retracing the same paths, hoping to spot something others had missed. But nothing ever came. By the 3rd day, the media had descended. Local news vans parked along Oak Terrace Drive. A young reporter with perfectly parted hair and a practiced frown spoke into a camera from the Pattersons' front yard. A 9-year-old girl, Molly Patterson, has been missing for over 72 hours. Authorities have no suspects and no significant leads. Rachel watched through the window, arms wrapped tightly around herself, while Derek paced the living room like a man walking through a fire he couldn't put out. Detectives had interviewed them separately, repeatedly. Same questions, again and again. When did you last see her? Had Molly ever run away before? Was there anyone who made you uncomfortable around her? They checked phones, emails, even Molly's drawings on the fridge. Nothing stood out. Rachel clung to her memory of that last moment. The way Molly smiled as she buckled her helmet, the sound of bike tires rolling down the sidewalk. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it again. But then the image would twist. She'd see her daughter turning a corner and never coming back. She couldn't stop herself from imagining every horrible scenario. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, just exist. By the end of the week, a massive search had turned up no new clues. The police chief gave a somber press conference, flanked by officers and K-9 units. There is no indication at this time that Molly left willingly, he said. We're treating this as a potential abduction. The word echoed like a bullet through the town. Abduction. Rachel almost collapsed when she heard it out loud. Until that moment, there had still been a sliver of denial. The irrational hope that Molly had gotten lost, that she'd show up tired and dirty, but safe. That word shattered it. Derek began sleeping on the couch. At first, it was practical, in case the phone rang, in case someone knocked, but soon it became a habit, a line drawn between them by pain and guilt. Rachel would lie in bed, listening to the creak of the floorboards as he wandered the house like a restless ghost. Once, she caught him in Molly's room at 3 a.m., sitting on the edge of the bed holding one of her stuffed animals like it was the last solid thing in the world. They attended a candlelight vigil held in front of the elementary school. Hundreds showed up. The crowd held flickering lights and wore yellow ribbons. Someone read a poem. Someone else sang a song about angels. Rachel didn't hear most of it. She just stared at the stuffed bear placed beneath the tree on the playground, the one Molly had loved climbing. She remembered pushing her on the swing just weeks ago. After that, things slowed. The tips dried up. Police pulled back. Detectives moved on to other cases. The flyers yellowed under the sun. Rain smeared the ink until Molly's smile became a blur. The reporters left. The volunteers stopped calling. The town moved forward inch by inch. But Rachel didn't. She refused to pack up Molly's things. Her daughter's room remained untouched. Bed made, books on the shelf, pajamas folded neatly in the drawer. She still made Molly's favorite mac and cheese on Thursdays. Still checked the porch every evening at 6. Derek, on the other hand, changed everything. He painted the living room a dull gray, sold their shared car, cut his hair short. Eventually, he moved out. First to a rented condo, then to a different part of the city. I can't live in that house anymore, he'd said quietly. It's killing me. Rachel hadn't argued. She just nodded, because it was already killing her too. And the worst part? The silence. That gaping, awful silence where a little girl's laughter used to be. 12 years would pass before that silence was broken. Before the past would claw its way back through concrete and dust. Before the truth began to whisper, not in words but in the quiet return of a pink bicycle. Years didn't pass so much as settle, like dust in an empty room. After Molly's disappearance, Rachel became a ghost in her own life. She quit her job at the insurance office 6 months later. She couldn't sit in that fluorescent-lit cube while people discussed claims and deductibles as if the world hadn't ended. She tried therapy. 3 times. Each therapist was kind, professional. None could give her what she needed. What she needed was Molly. At first, Rachel held on to hope like it was oxygen. She read every story of missing children found years later, girls reuniting with their parents after being kept in basements or traveling across states under false names. She kept a binder of these articles. Proof, she told herself, that Molly might still come back, that someone somewhere might recognize her daughter's dimpled smile and call the tip line. But with every birthday that passed, it got harder. On what would have been Molly's 13th birthday, Rachel baked a small cake, vanilla with blue icing, Molly's favorite. She left a slice on the front step overnight, an offering to the universe. The next morning it was untouched, soggy from dew. Eventually, Rachel found routine. Not peace, that word had no place in her world, but habit. She began working part-time at a floral shop. Something about the scent of lilies and roses. The simple act of trimming stems and arranging bouquets gave her something to do with her hands. She didn't talk much. She never mentioned Molly unless asked. When people recognized her, and they always did, she'd nod politely and change the subject. In time, she moved to a small rental home just 2 blocks away from the one where Molly had disappeared. She couldn't bear to live in that house anymore, but she couldn't leave the neighborhood either. As if Molly might one day walk down that same sidewalk and need her mother to be close. Meanwhile, the world continued. The trees on Maple Street grew taller. New families moved into old homes. A yoga studio opened where the dry cleaner used to be. Children who had played with Molly started high school, then college. Her name faded from news headlines, replaced by newer tragedies. Only Rachel kept the flame alive, quietly. She ran an online blog called The Hollow Page. It wasn't about Molly explicitly, not at first, but about grief, loss, and what it meant to live when the person you loved most might still be out there. It gained a small but loyal following. Other parents, siblings, people who lived in the same kind of limbo. Rachel never posted her real name. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted connection. And in those digital pages, she wrote things she couldn't say aloud. Sometimes I dream that she comes home and walks right into the kitchen. She's older, taller, but she still has the same laugh. In the dream, I cry and hold her for so long my arms ache when I wake up. The blog kept her going. That, and the occasional updates from Detective Sam Burgess, the second investigator assigned after the original detective retired. He was polite, young, clearly overwhelmed by the cold case file that had gone stagnant. He called once a year. Nothing new, no new leads, no new tips. Rachel had stopped expecting anything from those calls. She listened, nodded, thanked him, then went back to the silence. Until one Tuesday morning in late March, Rachel got a voicemail from an unknown number. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Ben Keller from Keller & Sons Construction. I think you may want to call me back. It's about a house on Juniper Lane. We were doing some demo in the basement and, well, just call me, please." Rachel stared at the message for a long time before playing it again. Juniper Lane. That was only 6 blocks away. She didn't know then that Juniper Lane held secrets, that a family who'd moved in just 2 years ago had decided to renovate the basement, that one of their walls, when opened, would reveal something that should have never been hidden. She didn't know yet that a pink bicycle, rusted, dusty, and unmistakably familiar, had just re-entered the world. And with it, the past had finally come home. Ben Keller wasn't the type to get rattled. He'd been doing residential construction for 20 years, patching foundations, tearing out rotted flooring, rewiring 100-year-old homes with bones that groaned when the wind blew. But this was different. It had started like any other basement job: tear out drywall, reframe the southeast corner, add built-in shelves for the new homeowners. The couple was nice, mid-30s, one toddler, a golden retriever named Scout. The basement was dry, well-insulated, boring, exactly how he liked it. Until one of his guys, Miguel, called him down with a strange look on his face. "There's something back here," Miguel said, pointing to a section of drywall that had come away too easily. Behind it, embedded in the concrete foundation wall, was an irregular cavity. A space someone had clearly carved out, maybe 2 feet deep, 5 feet wide, and sealed back in, not part of any original plans. Ben crouched down and pried the remaining plaster away with his crowbar. What stared back at him was dust-covered and bent, but unmistakable. A small pink bicycle with faded purple streamers, front wheel slightly twisted, the spokes rusted through in places. A Hello Kitty sticker still clung to the frame, half peeled and gray with time. Beside the bike was a children's backpack, crushed flat but still patterned with stars and planets. The zipper pull had a worn little rocket charm. Ben felt the hair on his arms stand up. It wasn't unusual to find old things in walls, newspapers, sometimes beer cans, even antique tools. But not this, not something so personal, so clearly out of place. He pulled out his phone and took a few photos. His hands were shaking. The next step was automatic. He called the police. Then, hesitating only briefly, he called a number he'd saved years ago. One he'd never thought he'd actually use. Rachel Patterson's? Her voicemail picked up after 2 rings. Ben left his message, clear and calm, trying not to betray the dread in his voice. Now, as he stood in the chilly basement of the Juniper Lane home, waiting for the police to arrive, he stared at the bike and tried to imagine the child who'd once ridden it. He remembered her, vaguely. A sweet kid who'd sold lemonade on the corner of Oak Terrace back when his own daughter was in 5th grade. This has to be her, he thought. Who else could it be? When the police arrived, 2 cruisers, no sirens, the young officer looked confused at first. You called about a bike? Ben led them into the basement. 10 seconds later, the younger cop's radio crackled to life. Dispatch, we're going to need a detective out here, possibly related to a cold case. We've got a positive on location and objects found. Within an hour, the property was roped off with yellow tape. A crime scene unit arrived. Forensics started photographing the scene from every angle. A detective, older, with graying temples and a furrowed brow, introduced himself as Detective Sam Burgess. He asked for every detail, down to the time Ben had first entered the basement that morning. And then, as the house hummed with quiet chaos, a black sedan pulled up outside. Rachel stepped out. She looked thinner than Ben remembered. Her auburn hair was streaked with silver, pulled into a loose ponytail. Her hands trembled as she approached, but her eyes were steady, focused. Ben met her on the front porch. "Rachel," he said softly. I didn't want to believe it, but I think it's hers." She didn't speak, just nodded once and followed Detective Burgess inside. The moment she stepped into the basement, the air changed. Rachel stopped a few feet away from the opening in the wall. Her breath caught. She didn't need to see much. The shade of pink, the twisted handlebar, the little rocket charm on the backpack zipper. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "That's Molly's." The entire room went still. Detective Burgess exchanged a glance with his team. "We'll have the bike and backpack processed, prints, DNA, any trace evidence we can find." Rachel nodded slowly, barely hearing him. She stepped closer, crouched beside the exposed wall, and reached out, not to touch, just to feel the space, the absence, the sudden collision of past and present. 12 years. 12 years and the world had moved on. But her daughter's bike had been here all along, sealed in concrete, hidden in a home just blocks away from where she disappeared. Rachel stood slowly, staring into the void in the wall. She whispered, more to herself than anyone else, she never left. And now, maybe the truth was ready to return. The crime scene team worked in hushed tones, as if afraid to disturb the silence that had been sealed into the wall for over a decade. Rachel remained in the basement long after the initial sweep had finished. She stood to the side as gloved officers gently removed the bicycle, photographing every angle, every flake of paint, every fiber. She watched as they slid the backpack into a sterile evidence bag. No one rushed her. No one asked her to leave. Detective Burgess stayed close by, his notepad in hand but unused. He didn't need to write anything down yet, not until Rachel was ready to talk. Eventually, she looked over at him. Who lived here? He flipped through a tablet handed to him by one of the uniformed officers. The current owners bought the place 2 years ago. Good people, nothing in their background. But before that, it was a rental property for about 7 years. Different tenants, mostly short-term. But before that, he paused. It was owned by a man named Doug Redmond, music teacher. Retired now. Lived here for about 3 years before moving out suddenly. Rachel frowned. Doug Redmond. That name sounds familiar. Burgess nodded. He taught part-time at Molly's elementary school. You mentioned him once, way back during the first year of the investigation. He ran the after-school music club. You said Molly liked him. Rachel's stomach turned. She remembered. Not just the name, but the face. Gray hair thinning on top. Plaid shirts, a gentle voice. He had played the piano at the school's spring concert the year Molly disappeared. He was nice, she said slowly. Too nice, maybe. But I never thought... She stopped. Her voice caught. We're tracking him down, Burgess said gently. He moved out of state years ago. Nevada, I think. I've already requested his current address. He'll be questioned, thoroughly. Rachel's eyes drifted back to the empty space in the wall. You think it was him? I don't know yet, Burgess admitted. But this house, this isn't random. It's too close, too connected. And the way that cavity was sealed, clean, careful, that wasn't the work of some desperate teenager. It was methodical, adult, thought out. One of the forensics officers approached them, holding up a small evidence bag. Inside was a torn piece of cloth, faded, dusty, and partially embroidered with what looked like a child's name. The edge of an M and a crooked O. Rachel stared at it. That's from her jacket, the one with the stars on the sleeves. I stitched her name inside the collar so it wouldn't get lost. Burgess's jaw tightened. That confirms it. The wall wasn't just hiding a bike. It was hiding her things. Someone didn't want her to be found. Silence fell again, heavy and suffocating. Rachel reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She opened the camera roll, scrolled past dozens of photos of flower arrangements and birthday cakes she'd made for clients, and stopped at one. Molly, age 9, standing in the driveway with that same bike, grinning ear to ear. She turned the screen toward the detective. That's what she looked like the day she disappeared, she whispered. He nodded, taking in the photo, then gestured to his team. Let's wrap for tonight. We'll process the items at the lab and secure the property. Rachel followed him up the stairs, her legs suddenly heavier than they'd been in years. Outside, the late afternoon light had turned amber. The neighbors had gathered, watching quietly from across the street. Some recognized her. Others just felt the tremor in the air, the unspoken truth that something terrible had once happened right there, in that quiet basement, and they had never known. Before she got in her car, Rachel looked back at the house. It was modest, 2 stories, brick siding, no different than dozens of others on the block, and yet it had held the answer for 12 long years. As she drove home, her hands trembled on the steering wheel. She didn't know yet what they would find. She didn't know if Doug Redmond was alive, or if he would confess, or if this was only the beginning of something even darker. But she knew this much. Her daughter had not simply vanished. Someone had hidden her. And now, after all these years, the wall had finally spoken. The next morning, the Georgia sun rose into a pale sky, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns of Marietta's suburbs. But for Rachel, the world had lost its warmth again. She stood at her kitchen counter, clutching a mug of coffee gone cold, staring blankly at the muted television screen. A local reporter was speaking from Juniper Lane, just outside the house where Molly's bicycle had been found. The headline crawled across the bottom. Break in cold case. Missing girl's belongings found after 12 years. Rachel turned off the TV. Her phone buzzed, a message from Detective Burgess. We located Doug Redmond. He lives in Carson City, Nevada. Retired 10 years ago. I'm flying out tonight. You'll hear from me soon. She stared at the text, her heart hammering. It was all happening so fast, and yet so painfully slow. Later that evening, in a small stucco house on the edge of Carson City, Doug Redmond answered his door to find two detectives standing on his porch. "Doug Redmond?" Burgess asked, holding up his badge. "We need to talk." Doug blinked at them. He looked older than Rachel remembered. Gray hair fully gone now, liver spots on his scalp, a slight tremor in his left hand. He wore a flannel shirt tucked into old jeans and wire-rimmed glasses that slipped down his nose. "Is this about the—" He hesitated. "Molly Patterson?" Burgess exchanged a glance with the local officer beside him. "Yes. Can we come in?" Doug stepped aside wordlessly. The house was tidy, old furniture, soft carpets, a piano in the corner covered in dust. On a nearby bookshelf, framed photos of other children, presumably students, smiling at school recitals. There were no signs of family, no wife, no children. Doug sat stiffly in an armchair. "I always knew this day might come." Burgess didn't respond at first. He placed a manila folder on the coffee table between them and opened it slowly. Inside were photos from the Juniper Lane scene. The bike, the backpack, the scrap of Molly's jacket. Doug stared at them for a long time. "She was a good kid," he murmured. "She used to stay after music club. Said she liked how quiet it was when the other kids left." Burgess leaned forward. "Mr. Redmond, we found her belongings sealed behind a wall in the basement of a home you owned at the time she went missing. That's not a coincidence." Doug nodded slowly. "I suppose not. So, tell me how they got there." The old man rubbed his forehead, suddenly looking much older. "She came to my house once," he said. "After club. She was crying. Said she didn't want to go home. I didn't know what to do. I let her sit in the backyard, gave her lemonade. She calmed down. I told her I'd walk her home, but she insisted she was fine." He paused. "I let her leave. She rode off on her bike. That was the last time I saw her. At least, that's what I told myself." Burgess narrowed his eyes. "You're saying you didn't hurt her?" "No," Doug said. "I didn't. But a few days later, I found her backpack in my garage. Then the bike. I don't know how they got there. I was scared. I didn't tell anyone. I thought if I reported it, they'd think I had something to do with it. So I—" He swallowed hard. "I sealed them up, in the wall, and sold the house the following year." Burgess stared at him, disbelief etched across his face. "You found a missing girl's belongings in your home and thought the right move was to hide them." Doug didn't argue. He looked down, ashamed. "I was weak, cowardly. I knew it then, and I know it now." Burgess stood. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence. You're also being investigated in connection with Molly Patterson's disappearance. If there's more to this, now's the time to tell it." Doug didn't resist. He just nodded, almost relieved. As the detectives placed him in handcuffs, Doug looked back at the dust-covered piano. "She liked the keys," he murmured. "Said they sounded like stars." Back in Georgia, Rachel sat on her couch, phone clutched in her hand, waiting. She knew the call was coming, knew the pieces were finally moving. But what she didn't know, what none of them yet knew, was that this was only the first thread, and once it was pulled, everything would unravel. The morning after Doug Redmond's arrest, Rachel awoke early. The sun was barely breaking over the rooftops of Marietta, and the house was silent except for the occasional creak of old pipes and the distant call of mourning doves. She hadn't slept much, a shallow, broken kind of sleep filled with half-dreams and memories. Molly's laughter, her tiny hands at the piano, the time she cried when the music teacher said she was too playful in class. Now Rachel stood at her kitchen window, coffee untouched, staring at the magnolia tree in the yard, blooming too early for spring. A soft knock pulled her out of her trance. It was Detective Burgess. He looked like he hadn't slept either. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie askew, and his expression was grim. "Can I come in?" he asked gently. Rachel nodded and stepped aside. "What happened? Is it about Redmond?" Burgess set his briefcase on the counter but didn't open it yet. "Yes, we've processed his home in Carson City, found boxes in his garage, old yearbooks, lesson plans, even photos of students from music club. Nothing obviously criminal, but one box was locked." Rachel's chest tightened. "And we forced it open," he said. "Inside were folders, names of kids, notes about their behavior, photos, not inappropriate exactly, nothing explicit, but odd, documented, obsessive." Rachel didn't say anything. She felt a coldness spreading through her chest. "There was one for Molly," Burgess added. "Detailed. He wrote that she was exceptionally bright but emotionally untethered. He made it sound clinical, like he was studying her." Rachel sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Her hands trembled in her lap. "I knew he was strange," she whispered. "Too soft-spoken, too careful, but we trusted him. Everyone did." "He still claims he didn't harm her," Burgess said, "but the way he documented his students, it's enough to open a wider investigation, especially since this isn't the only cold case from that period." Rachel looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" Burgess hesitated, then opened his briefcase. He laid out a map of Marietta and its surrounding towns. Pinned to it were photographs, headlines, small sticky notes. There were 2 other missing children around that same 3-year window. One in Kennesaw, one in Smyrna. Both unsolved. Both within 10 miles of where Redmond taught music at various schools. Rachel stared at the map, heart pounding. "You think it's connected?" "I can't say yet, but it's suspicious. And one more thing. When we ran background checks on Redmond, we found an incident from his 20s. He was a camp counselor up north. A girl there went missing for 2 hours. Found later, scared but unharmed. She never said what happened and he was never charged, but it's in his file." Rachel's voice was barely audible. "So he's been doing this for years. We believe he may have been grooming, watching, waiting." The word hung in the air like a storm cloud. Rachel stood, pacing the kitchen. "But if he didn't kill Molly, where is she?" Burgess shook his head. "We're still trying to answer that. His story is that he found the backpack and bike in his garage days after she disappeared. That he panicked. That he hid it out of fear." "But how did her things get there?" Rachel pressed. "She didn't just leave them." "We think someone placed them there deliberately," Burgess said. "And if it wasn't him—" Rachel stopped. "Then someone else was involved." Burgess nodded. "Or someone else took her and used his property to hide the evidence." They stood in silence for a long moment. Outside, a lawnmower buzzed to life in the distance. Somewhere, life continued, unaware that the past was pushing its way to the surface. Finally, Burgess spoke again. "There's something else you should see." He opened his tablet and pulled up a still frame from a surveillance video. The footage was grainy, time-stamped a week before Molly's disappearance. It showed a man standing at a street corner. Blurry, tall, wearing a baseball cap. "We believe this man may have been casing the area," Burgess said. "He's not Redmond. We don't know who he is yet." Rachel's mind raced. "If that man took her," she said, her voice growing firmer, "and planted her things in Redmond's house, then we've spent 12 years looking in the wrong direction." Burgess nodded. It's possible. Redmond's behavior may have distracted us from the real threat. Rachel exhaled sharply. We need to find him. Burgess looked at her with quiet resolve. We will. But Rachel knew something else now. Something colder, deeper. The wall hadn't just hidden Molly's bike. It had hidden a lie, a mistake, a trail gone cold not because there were no clues, but because someone had buried them beneath the surface. And now that lie was cracking open, because somewhere out there, the truth was still moving. And maybe, just maybe, so was Molly. Rachel wasn't sure what had woken her, but she sat upright in bed just after 2 a.m., heart pounding as if something had called her name. The house was quiet, too quiet. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and walked barefoot down the hallway, past Molly's old room, still untouched, still sacred. Moonlight spilled through the window and caught on the framed photograph that sat on the bookshelf. Molly, age 7, holding a paper trophy from her school's Kindness Award ceremony. Rachel traced a finger across the glass. It had been 3 days since Burgess's visit. 3 days of silence again. The forensic labs were still working through the bike and the backpack, and Redmond's arrest had been splashed across every local news station. But no further clues had emerged. Redmond, for all his unsettling tendencies, had maintained his story. He hadn't taken Molly. He'd only panicked, lied, covered up. It didn't add up. Rachel knew it. And now, it seemed, so did Burgess. Earlier that afternoon, she'd received a call from him. We might have something. Do you remember a man named Adam Royce? The name hadn't rung a bell at first, but Burgess explained he'd been a substitute janitor at Molly's school for just 3 weeks, covering a medical leave. No criminal record, nothing remarkable. But he'd lived in a trailer park just 4 blocks from the Patterson house, and he'd disappeared 2 days after Molly did. Disappeared. No forwarding address, no resignation, just gone. Police had visited the trailer that afternoon. It had long since been vacated, rented out, and repainted a dozen times over. But the park manager, a grizzled man named Oates, remembered Royce. Kept to himself, Oates had said. Didn't cause trouble, but he gave me the creeps, always watching the kids when the bus came in the morning. That was enough for a deeper dive. Royce had no social media, no credit card history, no license renewal in the last decade. But one detail stuck out. In 2012, a car registered in his name had been towed in South Carolina. A rusted-out blue Buick with a broken passenger side window and a parking violation. The vehicle had been impounded and eventually auctioned off. Burgess sent officers to the impound lot, now little more than a gravel lot under new ownership. They were trying to locate the car's buyer. If they could find it, they might find evidence. But the deeper they looked, the darker things felt. Rachel was back at her desk now, laptop open, logged into her blog's private inbox. She'd written a post earlier that night, a short update for her community. She'd kept it vague, careful not to mention names or locations. Just a quiet note about something emerging, something hidden that no one had expected. She had dozens of responses, most of them supportive. But one message stood out. It was from an anonymous account. No profile picture, no username, just a string of letters and numbers. The subject line read, "She's not yours anymore." Rachel clicked, pulse racing. The message was short, 5 words. "You buried her twice. Stop." Her stomach clenched. Hands trembling, she clicked to see the IP data. But the platform protected user privacy. She could only see the time, 1:48 a.m. Just minutes before she woke up. Rachel stood up, pacing. Was it a troll? Someone sick, reading the news and trying to torment her? Or was it him? Was this Royce? She forwarded the message to Burgess immediately, adding a short note. I think whoever sent this knows something, or is involved. His reply came just minutes later. Agreed. Don't respond. We're running it through cybercrime now. I'll call you first thing. Rachel sat back down, cold all over. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of the words. You buried her twice. Did that mean the wall? Or something worse? Her thoughts spiraled. What if Royce had taken Molly but hadn't acted alone? What if Redmond had known, had facilitated it, even if he hadn't been the one to do it? And what if Molly had been alive for some time, before she wasn't? Rachel forced herself to breathe, in and out, counting to 10. She looked at the screen again. Those 5 words weren't just a taunt. They were personal, intimate. Whoever sent them knew how guilt had eaten at her for 12 years. They knew her, and that meant this wasn't over. It was only beginning. Detective Burgess arrived at Rachel's house before sunrise. His face was hard, his jaw clenched in a way she hadn't seen before. He carried a thin folder in one hand, his phone in the other. As she let him in, Rachel noticed the exhaustion around his eyes. Not just from lack of sleep, but from something deeper. Something he didn't want to say out loud yet. I didn't want to do this over the phone, he said, walking to the kitchen table. He placed the folder down but didn't open it right away. Cybercrime traced the message you received. Rachel's heart stuttered. And? It was sent from a Tor-based relay, anonymous, rerouted through international proxies. In other words, someone went out of their way to make sure we couldn't trace them. But they slipped once. He tapped the folder. For about 15 seconds, the signal came through a cafe in Charleston, South Carolina, a public Wi-Fi network. Just long enough to log the IP. Then it vanished again. Rachel leaned in. Do you think it was Royce? Burgess opened the folder. Inside was a grainy surveillance still from a security camera. A man in a dark hoodie, sitting alone in a back booth of the cafe. His head was down, a laptop open in front of him. It's not clear, Burgess said, but the timestamp matches the message, and the physical description. Tall, lanky, gray stubble, matches what we have on Royce from 12 years ago. Rachel stared at the image. The man's face was barely visible, but something about the curve of his shoulder, the way he hunched over the keyboard, it made her skin crawl. We pulled all the CCTV we could, Burgess added. He was there for under 10 minutes, paid in cash, no card swipes, no name, no car visible in the lot. Then he's still hiding, Rachel whispered, still watching. Burgess gave a tight nod. And maybe more than that. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out another file. Thicker. We also re-examined the original case materials. There was something we missed back then. A report filed a year after Molly's disappearance, 2012, from a truck stop in rural Tennessee. Rachel stiffened. What kind of report? A waitress saw a girl who matched Molly's description. Blonde, thin, looked scared, said she was traveling with a man who wouldn't let her talk. She tried to approach, but the man dragged the girl away. By the time police got there, they were gone. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. The report was flagged but eventually dismissed because the girl's age didn't line up. The waitress described her as around 12. But at the time, Molly would have only been 10. So they assumed it wasn't her, Rachel said bitterly. Exactly, Burgess replied. But now, with everything else, we're reopening that lead. The waitress, Maria Hargrove, still works at that truck stop. I called her this morning. She remembers it. Vividly. Rachel stood up and paced the room, her voice rising. You're telling me Molly might have been alive for at least a year after she went missing. We can't confirm it was her, Burgess said cautiously, but it's enough to start pulling at threads. Rachel turned to face him. Her eyes were wet but clear. Then pull them. Burgess nodded. We will. We already are. He hesitated before continuing. We also learned that Royce worked seasonal jobs, crop harvesting, construction, even county fairs, all under aliases. That makes it harder to track, but it also means there may be more witnesses, people who saw him, people who saw her. Rachel exhaled, bracing herself against the table. "So, what happens now?" she asked. "Now," Burgess said, "we do something we should have done years ago. We build a profile, not just of Royce, but of anyone connected to him. Family, former roommates, old co-workers. We trace the path of those missing 12 years. He paused, his voice softening. "And Rachel, if Molly was alive after she vanished, there's a chance she still is." Rachel couldn't breathe for a moment. The thought was almost too much, too fragile, too painful, but she held on to it anyway. She sat down again, eyes fixed on the image of the man in the hoodie. "I want to help," she said quietly. "I want to look through every file, every photo, every message, whatever you'll let me do." Burgess gave her a slow, steady nod. "Then let's find her. Together." And with that, the quiet resolve between them solidified. Not just of a detective and a mother, but of two people unwilling to let the truth stay buried any longer. Because maybe Molly had vanished for 12 years, but her voice, however faint, was starting to return. And Rachel was finally ready to listen. The next few days unfolded like a crime scene in slow motion. Detective Burgess set up a temporary command post in a quiet corner of the Marietta Police Department. A corkboard stretched across one wall, covered in maps, timelines, faded photographs, and sticky notes in Sharpie black ink. Rachel was there almost every day, seated beside him with a laptop, combing through scanned documents and archived statements. It was the first time she had seen the original case files in their entirety. Thick binders of notes, evidence photos, school records, neighbor interviews. Some pages still smelled faintly of ink and damp paper, like they had been sealed in grief for over a decade. She found herself haunted by small details. The photo of Molly's bike taken during her last school safety lesson, her childlike signature on a permission slip, a note from her third-grade teacher describing her as bright, curious, a little daydreamy. But between the heartbreak, patterns began to emerge. One document stood out. A background check on Adam Royce. Buried in a supplemental file was a single-line item. Emergency contact listed as Calvin Royce, uncle. No address, no phone number, just a name. Burgess made a note of it and ordered a new trace. Within hours, a hit came back. Calvin Royce had died 3 years ago in Savannah, Georgia, a former mechanic with a criminal record for petty theft. But before his death, he'd rented a small storage unit under his name in a facility on the city's outskirts. The unit hadn't been opened in years. Payments had been made in cash until they stopped abruptly in 2022. The ownership had quietly reverted to the facility. No one had claimed the contents. Burgess got the warrant. 2 officers made the drive overnight. What they found made Rachel's breath catch when she saw the photos the next morning. Inside the unit, a duffel bag with men's clothes, several prepaid phones with dead batteries, and a blue crate labeled school stuff. Inside the crate were files, dozens of them, containing old student rosters from elementary schools across Georgia, including Molly's. More disturbing were the items at the bottom. A pink flip phone, long dead. A faded hairbrush with blonde strands still tangled in the bristles. And a photograph. Rachel stared at the photo on the evidence table now. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. It was grainy, slightly out of focus, but it showed a young girl sitting on a park bench, maybe 10 or 11 years old, with tangled hair and a distant expression. She wasn't looking at the camera. She wasn't smiling. But it was her, Molly, older than when she disappeared, gaunt, dirty, but unmistakable. Rachel's knees buckled and Burgess caught her before she fell. "She was alive," she whispered. "She was alive after After they stopped looking. After the case went cold. Burgess nodded, gently helping her into a chair. That photo, we're running it through metadata analysis now. It was likely taken with an older digital camera. Our techs are trying to recover any hidden data, timestamps, location info, anything. Rachel's eyes stayed locked on the photo. She was crying, but the tears felt strange. Not pain, not grief, not fully, something else. Hope and rage. They'd called off the search too soon. They'd let her disappear a second time, just like the message had warned. You buried her twice. Now, Rachel understood what it meant. Royce hadn't just taken Molly, he'd hidden her in plain sight, first from the town and then from the system meant to protect her. She looked up at Burgess. Her voice came low but strong. If she's still out there, we need to find her, before someone else does. Burgess nodded once, with the calm intensity of someone who'd already made the same vow. We will. He turned to the board, where a new thread was being pinned. A photo of the storage unit, a map connecting Savannah to Marietta, and a new label above the corkboard's center. Phase 2. Recovery. Because now they weren't just chasing shadows. They were following a trail, and this time they weren't going to stop. The trail wasn't just warm now. It was glowing. For days, the Savannah storage unit became the new heart of the investigation. The pink flip phone was sent to a digital forensic lab in Atlanta. Experts managed to recover fragments of data. A few grainy photos, no phone numbers, and one partially saved text draft. Can we just go now? You said if I was good, we'd go home. Rachel read it again and again until her chest felt hollow. The police weren't sure when it was written or if it was ever sent, but they knew this much. Molly had been alive long after her disappearance. She'd been trying, quietly, in her own way, to reach someone, to escape. Detective Burgess grew more methodical by the hour. He had a team of 3 now. A cybercrime officer from Atlanta named Jolene, a missing persons specialist flown in from Washington, D.C., and a young field agent named Andre who looked barely old enough to shave but could recall addresses from memory. They called the task force Operation Lantern, a nod to the light they hoped to cast on 12 years of darkness. Rachel worked alongside them daily, poring over every log, receipt, photo, and call. Burgess tried to protect her from the worst parts, but she refused to be sidelined. She'd waited too long for truth, even if it shattered her. One evening, as rain drizzled against the police department's windows, Jolene burst into the room holding a printed image. "Security footage," she said breathlessly, "from a Greyhound station in Columbia, South Carolina. Pulled from a forgotten server." She laid the photo on the table. It showed a man, face obscured by a baseball cap, same style as the cafe image, walking beside a girl with a hood pulled up, her hands stuffed deep in her pockets. The timestamp was September 28, 2012. Molly would have been 10. Rachel leaned in, holding her breath. The girl's posture was what hit her hardest. Not the face, blurry as it was, but the way her shoulders curled inward, defensive, like she'd spent years making herself smaller, and the way the man's hand hovered behind her back, not touching, not guiding, but close. Too close. "That's him," Rachel said softly. "That's Royce." They cross-referenced bus manifests. Nothing under Royce's name, but a man named Clay Rowland paid cash for 2 one-way tickets to Raleigh that day. A fake name, sure, but still a crack in the wall. Andre dug up a blurry DMV photo from 2009. When placed side by side with the Greyhound frame, the facial geometry matched. It wasn't proof for court, not yet, but it was enough to put out a bolo. Be on the lookout. They began to retrace Royce's steps using what little they knew. He didn't use phones, he didn't use credit. He worked cash-only jobs under fake names, kept moving every 6 to 12 months, never staying long enough to leave a mark. He was what Jolene called a ghost nomad, someone who learned to live without systems, without documentation, without digital footprints. But he left something else behind: people. A former farm supervisor in North Carolina remembered a man named Ray, who showed up with a little girl in 2013, claimed she was his niece. Quiet kid, he said. Always carried a book. Didn't talk much. The supervisor remembered the man because of a scar, a jagged line near his collarbone. They found medical records for Adam Royce from 2007. Emergency room visit for a fight outside a bar in Macon. Laceration near the collarbone. The same scar. He's the same man, Burgess said. We're closing the circle. But Rachel wasn't satisfied. Where's Molly? She asked. That was still the missing piece. Everything they had showed glimpses of her up to age 10 or 11. After that, silence. No sightings. No confirmed images. Nothing. Until Rachel received an email. It came from her blog contact form, the same one trolls had used in the past. But this message wasn't like the others. No threats, no mockery. Just a subject line that read, "I think I knew her." The message inside was brief. When I was in Oregon in 2016, I met a girl named M. She was working at a roadside stand with an older man. She looked scared. She didn't talk much. But one night she told me she wasn't supposed to say her real name. She said her mom had flowers in her hair. I asked what that meant. She said it was from a picture. I thought it was strange. I didn't say anything. But I've seen the news now, and I think it might have been her. The sender had included no return address, no name, but attached was a blurry cell phone image, taken at dusk under string lights. A man in a faded flannel shirt stood beside a girl behind a wooden produce booth. The girl was older now, maybe 13. Her hair was darker, dyed poorly, but her eyes— Rachel dropped the paper. I took that photo, she whispered, of me and Molly. When she was 5, we were at a sunflower festival. I put a daisy behind my ear. She kept giggling. I didn't even realize she remembered that. It wasn't just a clue. It was a message. Somewhere, somehow, Molly had been holding on. They had no idea where she was now. Oregon was 9 years ago. But it was more than they'd had in years, and it meant one undeniable thing. Molly had survived. Molly had resisted, and if she was still out there, she might be waiting to be found. Burgess stood slowly, staring at the image. We track the produce stand, local vendors, permits, we find that booth, and we work forward. Rachel nodded, her voice low and certain. She remembered me, she said. Even after everything, she remembered. The rain outside had stopped. The streets shimmered in the glow of the streetlights. And for the first time, hope wasn't a whisper. It was a trail. The next morning, Burgess's team turned their full attention to Oregon. Andre began calling every county office within a 100-mile radius of the coastal town where the photo had been taken. He tracked roadside vendor permits, produce stand records, seasonal labor logs, anything that might lead them to M and the man she worked with. Jolene sifted through social media archives. The photo Rachel had received was cropped tightly, but a reverse image search suggested it had once been posted to a forgotten Facebook page for a local market in Coos County. That page hadn't been active since 2017, but its admin had listed an email belonging to a woman named Judith Becker. She was 63, retired, living just outside Bandon, Oregon. When contacted, Judith remembered the quiet man and his niece. She had hired them for a summer season in 2016. He went by Russ, the girl M. He said they were traveling cross-country, selling jams and vegetables from his sister's garden. They worked the stand for about 6 weeks before disappearing one morning in August. No warning, no goodbye. He was polite, Judith said over the phone, but cold, not cruel, just hollow. The girl never spoke much, kept her eyes down, But one day she handed me a drawing she'd made. It was a sunflower, and there was a little girl standing in front of it. She paused. I kept it. I don't know why. Judith agreed to scan and send it. When the image came through an hour later, Rachel stared at it in silence. The child drawn in the picture wore a yellow dress, the exact dress Molly had worn in that long-ago Sunflower Festival photo. And in the background, in faint pencil strokes, were mountains, pine trees, a cabin. She was leaving us clues, Rachel said, voice cracking. She wanted someone to see her. That night, Rachel and Burgess flew to Oregon. It wasn't standard protocol, a mother inserting herself into an active investigation. But Burgess no longer treated Rachel as a bystander. She was as much a part of this as he was, maybe more. They met Judith the next morning. She was kind, sharp, and visibly shaken as she handed them the original drawing, its paper creased but carefully preserved. On the back, written in tiny, blocky handwriting, were 3 words. I don't belong. Rachel closed her eyes. Molly had written it. She was sure of it. She tried to leave a message, Rachel whispered. She was begging for someone to see her. Detective Burgess sat down beside her, examining the sketch. Mountains, pines, a cabin. Could be the Coast Range. There are hundreds of small off-grid cabins out there. Hunting retreats, seasonal rentals, even abandoned forestry shacks. Andre, now joining remotely via laptop, chimed in. I cross-checked Oregon Forestry Service records and Airbnb listings from 2015 to 2017. Found 4 properties matching a pine cabin description in that general area. 2 were rented out seasonally. 1 was burned down in 2018. The last one. That's interesting. He clicked and pulled up an old listing. Pineview Trail. Isolated rustic cabin, no electricity, solar water heater, cash only. Guess who rented this property every summer from 2012 to 2016 under a fake name? Andre continued. A man calling himself Russell Grady, paid in cash, no ID required, but the landowner took a Polaroid for insurance reasons. The photo, now scanned and digitized, appeared on the screen. It was Royce. Older, heavier, beard thicker, but unmistakably him. Standing beside the cabin porch, holding a fishing pole. Next to him, barely visible in the frame, stood a young girl with darkened hair and a drawn face. No smile. Her arms were crossed tight over her chest. Rachel clutched the table to steady herself. Where is this cabin now? Burgess asked. The landowner stopped renting it after 2017, said it needed repairs, Andre replied. Still owned privately, still standing. I've already contacted local deputies. They're on their way. 2 hours later, Rachel and Burgess arrived at the edge of the pine forest with a team of law enforcement officers. The trail to the cabin was rough, overgrown, barely visible. The truck could only take them halfway before they had to continue on foot. As they hiked, the air grew colder, denser, heavy with the scent of moss and earth. Pines towered above them, muting every sound. Finally, the cabin appeared. It was small, weathered, sagging under the weight of years. The front door hung slightly open, swaying in the breeze. Guns drawn, officers swept the inside. It was empty, but not untouched. Dust coated most surfaces, but one mattress had been disturbed, the indentation of a small body still visible. A wooden box in the corner held old clothes. Children's clothes, a hairbrush, a pair of sneakers, size 5. On a nail above the bed hung a necklace made of paper clips and colored beads, the kind a child would make, the kind Molly had made dozens of times before. Rachel stepped into the doorway and didn't move. Her chest heaved, but she refused to cry. She lived here, she said. She slept here. She waited here. Burgess examined the dust patterns on the floor. Someone's been here recently. This place isn't abandoned. One officer stepped outside and called from the woods. We've got fresh tire tracks." They followed the prints through the mud, leading down a winding path toward a gravel turnout, and then gone. He'd left. Again, but not long ago. "Do you think she's with him?" Rachel asked. Burgess didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the tree line. "If she is," he said, "we're closer than we've ever been." Rachel looked up at the canopy of pine trees. She could almost hear it, a whisper, an echo. Her daughter had walked this ground, slept in this cabin, left clues in sketches and phrases and eyes that had once glowed and dimmed too soon. They were no longer chasing a ghost. They were chasing a man, and the girl he'd stolen, and Rachel wasn't leaving the woods until she got her daughter back. For the first time in 12 years, Rachel felt something shift, not just in the case, but inside herself. What had once been despair had turned into something fierce and immovable. The scent of pine still clung to her jacket as she sat in the temporary operations tent set up near the trailhead. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from proximity. Molly had been here, not years ago, recently, and that changed everything. Deputies had secured the cabin and surrounding area. Drones were deployed above the forest. Wildlife cameras were pulled from nearby trees. Most were dead, likely avoided or dismantled by Royce. He was smart. He had lived as a shadow for more than a decade. He knew how to disappear, but this time they were only hours behind. Inside the cabin, forensics found a torn piece of notebook paper wedged beneath the mattress. It had a single line scribbled in childlike handwriting, wobbly and urgent. "He says I'm not allowed to remember." Rachel didn't need confirmation. It was Molly. The phrasing, the slant, everything screamed her child's voice. The girl who once wrote stories about starfish and made birthday cards with too many hearts now left messages like breadcrumbs through the years, and this one was more than a clue. It was a cry. "He's losing control," Rachel said, clutching the note. "She's pushing back. She wants to remember. She wants out." Detective Burgess stood near the field map pinned to a foam board. Red pins marked every confirmed Royce sighting, yellow for M. He drew a finger along the roads heading east from the forest, pausing at a thin highway skirting the edge of Crater Lake National Park. "He's moving again," Burgess said, "but not randomly. He always takes back roads, state lines, places with low enforcement. He's headed toward Idaho or Montana." "Montana," Rachel said quickly. He mentioned it to Judith, the woman from the produce stand. She said he once talked about cabins up north, places with clean water, no people. He called it his safety plan. Burgess nodded. "We're already alerting park rangers and highway patrols in 4 states, and we've issued a nationwide Amber Alert under a long-term recovery designation. Facial recognition hits will now be monitored at state lines, gas stations, anywhere with security footage." Rachel sat down heavily. Her voice was low but unwavering. "I want to talk to her." Burgess turned. "What do you mean?" "When you find her, I want to be the one who speaks to her first," Rachel said. "I know there are protocols. I know trauma specialists usually do the first contact, and I understand why. But she knows me. Somewhere, deep down, she does, and I need her to hear my voice." Burgess studied her a moment, then said, "We'll figure it out, but I think you're right." That night, back at the motel near the state forest, Rachel couldn't sleep. The air felt too still, her heart too loud. She sat by the window, watching the trees sway in the dark, wondering where her daughter was at that moment. Was she asleep in the back of a truck? Sitting at a campsite, staring at the stars she used to draw on everything? Was she afraid, or was she quietly planning? She remembered the time Molly had gotten lost at a farmer's market when she was 5. Rachel had only looked away for a second, and when she turned back, Molly was gone. The panic had risen in her like a wave, and it wasn't until nearly 10 minutes later that she saw her daughter calmly sitting near the corn booth explaining to a stranger that her mom would find her. She always does, Molly had said. Rachel had cried right there in front of everyone. Now, 12 years later, she whispered into the dark, "I'm still looking, baby. I'm still coming." The next morning, a call came in from a ranger station in southern Montana. A man and a girl matching the description had been seen at a gas station just outside the Custer-Gallatin forest. They had bought camping supplies, canned food, and batteries. The girl had kept her hood up the entire time. The man paid in cash. It was Royce. The ranger, suspicious because of the recent alerts, had taken down the license plate, an Idaho plate registered to a stolen vehicle from Boise. "We're moving in," Burgess said as he ended the call. "The Rangers are coordinating with state police. We've got helicopters on standby, and I want you ready." "Ready?" Rachel said. "We're going to Montana." The flight was short but felt eternal. Rachel barely spoke. Her eyes were fixed out the window the entire time, searching the mountains below like she could spot her daughter from the sky. By late afternoon, they arrived in a staging zone near a ranger post. Officers were already in position around a 2-mile radius of the last sighting. It was thick wilderness, rocky trails, old fire roads, and stretches of dense pine no GPS could penetrate. But dogs had picked up the scent from the stolen vehicle. And the track led east, deeper into the woods. Rachel stood in the center of the command tent, surrounded by uniforms and radios, yet felt completely alone. Until a call came in over the radio. "We've got movement. Cabin structure spotted. Smoke from a chimney. One adult male visible through binoculars. Female presence unknown. Back of structure." Everyone fell silent. Rachel's heart slammed in her chest. Burgess met her eyes. "This is it." A tactical team moved quickly. The plan was to surround, contain, and apprehend without confrontation. They wanted to avoid trauma, avoid panic. But there was no guarantee Royce wouldn't run. Or worse. Burgess turned to Rachel. "You stay here. If she's inside, we'll bring her out." Rachel didn't argue, but her fists clenched so tight her knuckles went white. Minutes passed, then 20, then 30, and then the radio crackled again. "Cabin secure, suspect in custody, girl located inside, alive, responsive." Alive. Rachel stumbled back, choking on a sob. Burgess nodded to an officer and whispered something. Then he turned to her. "Come on," he said. "She's asking for her mother." The walk through the forest felt like a dream. Pine needles crunched underfoot. The wind whispered in the trees. And then she saw it, a tiny, weathered cabin nestled between tall firs. Officers stood around it like sentinels. And at the edge of the porch, wrapped in a gray blanket, stood a girl. She was taller, thinner. Her hair was dark, messy, half pulled into a ponytail, but her eyes, those eyes hadn't changed. Rachel stopped, afraid to breathe. The girl looked at her for a long, silent moment. Then her lip trembled and she whispered one word. "Mom!" Rachel broke into a run. No words, no apologies, no explanations. Just arms, tears, and a cry that sounded like a life beginning again. And in the forest, for the first time in 12 years, the distance between them finally disappeared. They held each other for a long time, not saying anything, not needing to. Molly trembled in her mother's arms, her face buried into Rachel's shoulder, as if the warmth alone might undo 12 years of silence. She smelled like smoke and pine needles. Her frame was thin, too thin, but her arms clutched tightly around Rachel's neck like she remembered how to hold her mother, even if everything else had been stolen. Rachel whispered again and again, "I'm here. I've got you. You're safe now." When the embrace finally loosened, Molly stepped back, looking up at her mother with tired, searching eyes. She had aged, of course. 12 years had turned a child into a teenager. But behind her face, behind the pale bruises of time, Rachel could still see the little girl who used to fall asleep with glitter in her hair and stuffed animals under both arms. A trauma specialist named Diane gently approached, wrapping a blanket tighter around Molly's shoulders. She spoke softly, asking basic questions. Her name, her age, whether she was in pain. Molly answered in a voice so faint it was barely more than breath. "I'm 16, I think. I'm not sure." Diane nodded gently. "That's okay. You're doing great." Rachel stood close, resisting every instinct to scoop her daughter up and never let go again. But she waited, watched, listened. Burgess appeared beside her. His voice was low. "Royce is in custody. He surrendered without a fight. He was alone. No weapons. The cabin had evidence of long-term occupation. Notebooks, maps, old ID tags. All fake. He's been planning escape routes for years, but he didn't run." Rachel didn't take her eyes off Molly. "Why?" Burgess exhaled. "I think he knew it was over, and maybe Molly stopped being willing to run with him." Later, at the nearest hospital, doctors examined her. No signs of physical trauma beyond malnutrition and old minor injuries. No fresh wounds. The staff said she was quiet, obedient, but alert. "She's been isolated," one nurse whispered to Rachel. "But she's sharp, watches everything, doesn't miss a word." Rachel stayed with her through it all. Through the intake forms, the vitals, the questions. Molly didn't say much, but when she looked at her mother, her eyes clung to her like a tether. The hospital gave them a quiet room with dim lights and a window that looked out onto a grove of trees. Rachel sat in a chair beside the bed while Molly rested. For a long time, they simply existed beside each other. The kind of silence that speaks louder than words. When Molly finally spoke, it was just one sentence. "He lied a lot." Rachel swallowed hard. "I know, sweetheart. I know he did. I thought, if I followed the rules, one day he'd let me go." Rachel reached across and gently took her hand. "You didn't have to earn your freedom, Molly. It was always yours. He just made you forget that." Molly didn't cry. Not yet, but her fingers tightened around Rachel's. Outside the room, the world began to move again. News stations picked up the story. Headlines scrolled across TVs. "Missing Georgia girl found after 12 years, alive." A photo of Molly from age 9 flashed beside a new image taken in the hospital hallway. Eyes down, blanket over her shoulders. Royce was charged with kidnapping, child endangerment, and multiple counts of identity fraud. More charges would follow. His arraignment was scheduled within days. He refused to speak during the initial hearing. His court-appointed attorney claimed he had dissociative behaviors. No one believed it. The FBI and child trauma specialists took over the long-term recovery plan. Rachel met with counselors, therapists, advocates. They used terms like reintegration and complex PTSD. They warned Rachel that Molly's return, while joyful, would not be easy. She would need time, space, consistency. Rachel nodded. She was ready. A week later, they flew back to Georgia. Reporters gathered at the airport, but officers kept them shielded. Rachel and Molly exited through a side gate. No cameras, no questions, just home. Rachel had spent days preparing Molly's old room. She didn't try to make it exactly the same. Too much time had passed. Instead, she filled it with soft, warm things. Clean sheets, new books, clothes she could grow into, a nightlight shaped like the moon. When they stepped inside, Molly paused. Her eyes landed on the bookshelf. The sunflower drawing from years ago, the one Rachel had scanned and kept, sat in a frame. Molly stared at it, then at her mother. "You remembered?" "Every day," Rachel said. "I never stopped." That night, Rachel sat outside her daughter's door until she heard the slow, rhythmic breathing of sleep. She cried. Not the wild, helpless sobs of years past, but the quiet, breaking kind that comes when hope becomes real. In the weeks that followed, Molly spoke more. She told her story in pieces, not all at once, not linearly, but in fragments. Some things were too much to say, others poured out like rain. She remembered being taken. She remembered being told her parents didn't want her anymore, that the world had forgotten, that she was safer staying hidden. For years, she believed it. For years, she didn't know her last name. But every so often, something broke through. A memory, a smell, a phrase from a storybook. And over time, she realized the man who kept her wasn't keeping her safe. He was keeping her small. So she waited, watched, learned. And finally, when she saw the chance, when he began to slip, she left her clues. The bike in the wall, the note under the mattress, the photo, the drawing, the words, and someone had found them. Her mother had followed the trail, and in the end, that made all the difference. Epilogue. The leaves began to change in Georgia. Molly stood in the front yard in a hoodie 2 sizes too big, watching squirrels dart across the lawn. She turned slowly when Rachel walked outside, 2 mugs in hand. "Tea?" Rachel asked. Molly nodded. "Thanks." They sat on the porch swing together, quiet, comfortable. After a while, Molly asked, "Will they always look at me like I'm broken?" Rachel thought for a long moment, then said, "Some might. But the people who matter, they'll just see you." Molly sipped her tea. "I don't remember everything," she said, "but I remember your laugh. I don't know why, but that part stayed." Rachel smiled, eyes wet. "That's enough." The wind rustled the trees. Somewhere down the block, a child's bike bell rang, and inside a house that had once held only echoes, 2 voices now lived again. Not perfectly, not easily, but together. And that, after everything, was a beginning.